All right, let's talk about objection handling. Why would we want to talk about objection handling? Well, I think it's one of the number one things that if an agent wants to be successful in the real estate business, this is where you really need to start. Why is that? Because objections are a reality. They are going to come up in our conversations, whether we're prospecting, when we're showing houses, or when we're trying to list houses, when we're negotiating. It's there all the time. And a lot of agents will become strengthened with their objection handling skills, and they feel like they can just tackle the world. And other agents they lose confidence because they get into the arena where there are objections and they don't do a very good job. So what they try to do is avoid those situations all the time. So they never prospect hard to get listing appointments because they know they're not going to be able to handle the objections at the kitchen table. It just makes sense. So if you can learn to become a Jedi Knight of objection handling, then you're going to be a lot more confident, and you're going to get out there and you're going to be prospecting for business and hopefully be a lot more successful. So let's just dive right in. So let's define what is an objection. So an objection, I think it could be a question in the mind of a seller or a buyer or potential client that's left unanswered during a presentation. It could be a test. It could be that the client has read something in the newspaper or somewhere online where they want to bring up these questions. For instance, will you cut your commission? Or we only want to give you a 30-day listing term, something like that. They're giving you these tests because they've been told to, or maybe they want to just see how powerful an objection handler you can be. If you think about it, they're going to be trusting you to handle one of the largest transactions financially in their lifetime, and they're going to make sure that you can get in the ring and fight for them. And so this is one way where they might be willing to do that. So that's what it is. It's sort of some questions that are left over. It could be a test, but we do know this. It's going to be very important for you to learn how to handle these objections if you want to be successful. Now, we're going to talk about techniques, we're going to talk about strategies, and we're going to talk about some general objections that you're going to hear and how to handle these things. Now, is there one universal objection handler that's going to work in every case? Absolutely not. So it doesn't always work, but I'll tell you what we know never works, and that's just to give up. When somebody gives you an objection, if you just say, oh, okay, and you just sort of walk away, that never works. So this is a strategy. These are some techniques. These are some suggestions that are going to keep you in the game if you do your part and you work on this stuff. So let's dive right in. So to become a powerful objection handler, the first thing you've got to do is reprogram your mind on how you respond when you hear an objection. Normally, when you hear an objection, you're going to feel nervous. You're going to start to sweat. You're going to want to get defensive. And that's just natural human behavior. But we have to reprogram our mind so that that's not the case. What we want to do when we hear an objection or we hear the word no, we want to sort of turn that around and actually be smiling and excited that somebody brought that up. And that's totally different from the natural behavior, and it makes people feel more comfortable. It puts them in a less defensive position if you're not defensive. So again, reprogram your mind and be excited and glad that the objection was brought up. So when you start to handle objections, start this with agreement rather than disagreement or conflict. You want to agree and then build your case from there. So an example of an agreement would be using agreement phrases like, hey, I can appreciate that. Oh man, I hear what you're saying. I understand that completely. I feel the same way. I know where you're coming from. Those are agreement phrases that, again, takes people from being on the defensive and sort of like you've walked across the aisle and now you're working together. You're on the same team versus being somebody that's maybe a stranger or outside the moat. You're now it sort of brings you in the circle of trust, if you will. Remember, it's easier to get someone to agree with you if you've already agreed with them. So this point is really appropriate to the beginning of my career and maybe my marriage too. If you argue, you may win the battle, but you're probably going to lose the war. I remember back when I was first in the business and working a lot of for sale by owners, I would convince through argument, I could convince almost any for sale by owner that they should actually list with an agent. They just hated me so much by the end of that conversation that they didn't want to list with me. So that didn't really help me. I won the battle, but lost the war. And so that's what arguing does. What you have to do is you need to be in a more of a situation where you're not arguing, you're guiding the client towards a logical outcome, towards the desired outcome, rather than trying to fight them through this thing. One way that you can make people feel like you're not being sincere in this whole thing is using the word but. We're going to talk about a strategy of how to handle these objections, and one of the areas that people forget, and it's natural because we use the word but so often in our human conversations. I almost said it again then, but the word but negates. So if I say, gee, Bob's a nice guy, he's friendly, he's attractive, he's just pleasant to be around, but, well, that sort of negates everything I've said. If you use the word and, that adds to. So it's a much friendlier situation to use the word and. So when you're handling objections, make sure to cut the word but out of the conversation and use the word and. Try to eliminate that word, and I'll probably say it 10 more times during this class, and I'm going to try not to. Okay. Another important thing when you're talking about objection handling is to identify objections versus conditions. We sort of defined objections. An objection is something that can be overcome. Will the objection handlers that we learned today always do that? No. There's not one that always works. However, an objection is able to be overcome, where a condition is something that really can't be overcome. A condition would be like, I'll give you an extreme example. If you're trying to list somebody's home and you're talking to someone and they say, hey, we don't own the home, well, that's never, you can be the slickest, fastest talking salesman in the world, that isn't going to work. Another example might be, well, we're $150,000 underwater. That, again, objection handling doesn't help with that. So be just careful. Conditions, if you waste a lot of time trying to use objection handling skills on things that are conditions, it just doesn't work. All right. One of the most common strategies when people hear an objection is going to be to just turn on your mouth and just start rambling on about some kind of amateur objection handling. Just blah, 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 blah. We call that verbal vomit. And you want to stay away from that. So when you ramble on, you create unanswered questions in the mind of the prospect. Again, it's going to be more objections. And then the more you talk, the more objections you're creating. So what we want to do is we want to ask questions, not ramble on with tremendous amounts of statements, but ask questions. This is different from what other people are doing. This is going to help lead that client down the path to the desired outcome that they want. So you're going to ask questions, and when you do that, you're controlling the conversation, and you're going to steer the client away from future objections and also towards the ultimate goal, whether it be to buy a home or sell a home or list or whatever it might be. So again, if we just stop this class and ask people that are watching this to just give us some examples of how they would handle objections, you'd just hear constant talk. It would be like a vomitorium. And we can't have that. We need to learn to ask questions, and we're going to work on that right now about asking questions. So if you practice asking questions, that's the first step to becoming better at handling objections. So in order to develop the skill of asking questions, let's go through some potential objections and think about what questions could you ask during the objection handling. So for instance, here's an objection you hear all the time. We're not sure that we're ready to list tonight. That could come up any time, right? People want to think it over, whatever it might be. So rather than just say, hey, are you crazy? That doesn't make any sense. Let's do it tonight, and here's why, and just blah, 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 blah. No good. We're going to ask some questions. Think about this. When you're asking questions, we want to go back to the seller's motivation. If we can remind them through asking questions of their motivation, that is going to help them make the decision. So people say, hey, we're not sure we're ready to list tonight. Hey, I understand that. Again, we're agreeing. And let me ask you one thing. When do you need to be in Florida? Again, if they're motivated to be in Florida, remind them of that. So every day that they procrastinate the decision, it's putting off that ultimate destination of getting there. Here's another one. Hey, I understand. Tell me, what do you think is making you hesitant to make a decision tonight? So clarify, draw them out, get them in the conversation. Another good question. If I could find the perfect buyer for your house, say tonight or tomorrow, when would you want them to see your home? Or you could say, if that perfect buyer's out there right now, would you want to miss out on the fact that they might want to see your home tomorrow morning? So that's some examples of that one. Here's another objection that we can use. We would like to start high. This is for listing. We'd like to start high with the price and leave some wiggle room in. Now, you hear that all the time too. That's a strategy that a lot of sellers think is good. Ultimately, we know what happens with that is the house stays on the market for a long time and they wind up getting less. So a good question to ask would be, do you know what happens when a house is overpriced? And then draw that out. And if they're not going down the right path, help them by asking other questions. Well, what would you do if you saw a house, when you're looking at houses in Florida, if you saw one that was on the market for 2 days versus one that was on the market for 100 days, which one do you think you'd be more willing to try to chop them off at the knees during the negotiation? Obviously the one with more time on the market. So here's another question you might want to ask. Hey, if we price it right, rather than waiting around and building days on market, do you think maybe we could get multiple offers and actually drive the price up? I like that question. If you were the buyer and you looked at these same comparables that we've just looked at, where do you think the price would need to be? So there's some ideas for that one. And lastly, another objection you hear is, we have a friend in the business. So questions you might want to ask, has there ever been a time when you tried to do a friend a favor in business and it just turned out to backfire? We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's definitely a good question. So you might say, hey, really, is it about doing a friend a favor, or is it about hiring the best agent for the job of selling your home? And then lastly, I wrote down, don't you think ultimately your friend would appreciate you not putting them in this horrible position where the friendship could be jeopardized? So those are 3 good examples of some questions that you might ask when you hear some of those objections. So again, becoming a skilled question asker, if that's a real word, a questioner, is going to be a key to becoming a great objection handler. So a couple things to remember before we move on into the exact strategy. 1, a powerful presenter and a powerful salesperson always anticipates the objections before they come up and actually practices handling them before they come up. How do you do that? Well, you do what's called pre-qualification. You need to, before you have an appointment, you want to talk to people, you want to go down a list of pre-qualification questions, not necessarily in real estate we refer to pre-qualification, you think about the lender and making sure people have the money. That's important too. But I want to find out what their motivation is. I want to try to draw out all the different things that are going on. Are they actually talking to other agents? During these questions, do they bring up things like the commission or whatever else? Whatever comes out in the pre-qualification questions, write those down and then anticipate what objections might come up as well. Number 2, as far as things to remember, when presenting, don't jump to conclusions. So if you hear an objection, don't automatically assume that you know what the root cause of that is. Let them finish what they're saying. That's a huge skill. We talked about asking questions. The other is listen to the answer. Zip it and listen every once in a while so that you can hear what the real objection is. I wrote down, shut up and listen. I could use that sometimes myself. So when you hear that, then you can sort of try to clarify the objection after you hear the initial line and maybe ask a few more follow-up questions. And then when you are, like I said, it's sort of redundant here, but I said when you qualify your appointments, even to the minute when you're qualifying the actual time you're going to have the appointment, again, listen and see if there's any potential objections in that dialogue and be prepared. If you know what the objections are going to be, it's fairly simple. You can practice the objection handlers and be prepared when you get in front of the client. So let's talk about a general strategy of how to handle objections. We've touched on this before, but this is sort of the strategy. So you hear an objection. I'm going to give you a list of objections that are very common, but any objection, you hear the objection. So the first thing, you need to listen to the objection. You need to smile. You need to be excited that they brought it up. Remember, we're not getting defensive. We're not getting worried. We're not starting to sweat. We're taking a totally opposite stance on this thing. We're excited, and we want to step across the boundary. We want to give them a hug. We understand. I get it. And use those phrases of agreement hey, I can appreciate that. I know where you're coming from, those things. And be sincere with understanding, because these things are real in most cases to the buyer or to the seller that you're working with. Number 2, I wrote down clarify. Again, draw out the real objection. Clarify by asking more questions and continue to agree. Number 3, don't use the word but. We want to use and, because see, we're agreeing, we're bonding, we're clarifying, we're understanding, and at some point we have to handle the objection. So to connect the agreement with the handling of the objection, we're going to use the word and, not the word but. Then, number 4, we want to actually get into handling the objection. How do we do that? We want to ask questions that lead the buyer or the seller to the desired result. So we're going to ask questions and use logic to help them discover the answer, which should be the desired result for both people. People either want to buy a home or they don't. People either want to sell a home or they don't. We're just trying to help them with that process. We're not trying to swindle anybody into doing anything. We just want them to understand that we are the best people to help them through the process, and we're going to do a heck of a job during that process. And then lastly, once you've handled the objection, this is the key that so many people forget, is you need to close. A closing is a sort of a natural ending to a sales conversation. If we've had the discussion and all the questions are answered, then let's go ahead and do what we got here to do, and that's either list your home or help you buy one. We don't want to close because we don't want to be pushy. We're worried about just not looking good and being sort of pushy or whatever else. And nobody wants to be that way. But a close, when you've handled the objections, it's natural to close. So don't fear that. The worst situation, I guess the worst close you could use would be any other questions. So you've handled the objection, you say, hey, any other questions? All you're doing there is inviting more objections. You say, hey, and then this and this and this, so let's go ahead and do the right thing and sign the document. And then you say, any other questions? Boom, they hit you with another objection. Boom, another one. Next thing you know, you're unconscious on the floor, and you don't want that. So, good closes, one of my favorites I just said. So we agree on the price. You feel like I've got the experience to get it done. So all we need to do now is just simply sign the contract so I can help you get that new house in the West End. Won't that be great? Smiling and nodding. You can get a long way in life just smiling and nodding, and people like to agree, rather than just say, any other questions? Or, okay, you think it over and I'm out the door. It's important to close. Okay, so that's sort of the general strategy that works for any objection. Here's a couple other little techniques that you could use that maybe are a little different, that maybe are specific to certain types of objections. So one objection that we hear a lot is, will you cut your commission? Hey, that's understandable that a seller would want you to do that. Everybody's trying to save money. We get that. And you think about in a career, if you have a 20-year career in real estate, if you cut $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 off each commission, what are you leaving on the table? And the question really bears is are you worth it? Do you believe that you are worth the fee that you charge? And you should believe that, because you're doing everything for these people to help them get a good deal or to get the best deal on their house. You deserve to be compensated for that. Money's how we say thank you in business, and if you do a great job, hey, the price is the price. But some people want to object to that. They want to say, hey, well, can you cut your commission? A lot of times they've heard this on the radio, they've heard this on a podcast, they've read it in a book. They don't really want to talk about it. In fact, most people are very uncomfortable when talking about money like this. So this is a technique that an agent here at Hometown one time showed me. It's called the stick and move technique. And this person used it in one particular way. She's a sort of a Southern classy gal, and we were meeting with one of her friends, and they were just sort of yucking it up, and the girl said, well, maybe we just go ahead and knock that commission on down a little bit. You can do that for me, couldn't you? And our agent's like, no, we can't do that. Go and get out of here with that. And just moved right on. It was amazing how it worked. Now, I don't think I can get away with it, that style. Maybe you can't, but maybe you can. But another way we do that is just when somebody says, hey, would you be willing to cut your commission? Just, no. Any other questions? And just shut up. I think there's no objection where people want to just ramble on more than this one. If you just disagree, and you say, God, I certainly understand, but no, our company policy is 6%. That's going to help you so much in the long run if you just stop That gets it done most of the times. Now, does that end it every time? Absolutely not, and you need to be prepared with some more objection handlers, but that is a great one. If you could just use that every time, I guarantee you in a 20-year career, that's probably going to save you $50,000. So think about that. All right, the next one we want to talk about is the level shift. This is a really cool technique. Sort of reminds me of in Star Wars, the Jedi mind trick kind of deal. And this one works really well. Like if somebody were to come and say, gee, you're new in the business. We're worried about you being so new in the business. Well, what you need to do, if you're new in the business, there's certain things that, that's true, and there's certain things that are weak. We want to get away from the weaknesses and move to where you're strong. So that's the level shift, moving from the level where you're weak to where you're strong. So how you do that, somebody might say, okay, you're new in the business, we're worried about that. Hey, I understand, this is a big decision. You want to make sure you get the right person for the job, right? Of course you do. So I'm going to tell you there are really two different kinds of agents in the business. What do you think those are? And they might say experience, inexperience, whatever else. Say, yeah, that's important. And I'll tell you really what it boils down to is active versus passive. And then you ask the question, what kind of agent would you want to hire to sell your home or to help you buy a home? And I don't think anybody's ever going to say passive on that. So you want to associate yourself with being the active agent, and then we want to shift the level to make the experienced agents look like they're the passive agents. So how do we do that? So you ask, well, what kind of activities does an active agent utilize to sell your home or to help you buy one? And they're going to ramble off whatever it is. They're going to use the latest technology. They're going to be there for me. They're going to be available. They're going to call me back. They're going to keep me posted and yada, yada, yada. And so what you need to do, again, is equate all that information with you. It's funny that you said that. That's the exact strategy that we implement every day. And you know what we find in some of these more passive agents is they don't call you back. You've heard about that, haven't you? What else do passive agents do? And they'll say, well, gee, they're not Johnny on the spot when a new listing hits the market, and they don't do a lot of open houses or whatever else it might be. And again, you're trying to equate that with the experienced agent. Now we're gradually moving away from being where inexperienced is bad and experience is good. We're trying to switch it where really inexperience is great and experience is bad. So you want to say, hey, do you think that the experience, that passive experienced agent, if they've got 10 or 12 listings, how important is it that yours sells? Or is it just a numbers game? That might be a good question to ask. How much personal attention can someone give you if they've got 10, 20, 30 listings? If they've got 10, 20, 30 buyer clients, are they going to be able to give you that attention? I am. I am here for you. In this market, do you want somebody who's going to be studying the MLS every day, and as soon as a house pops up, they're going to have the availability to get you in there? That's what we're trying to do. So let's do the right thing. Let's not hire somebody who's really just playing the numbers game. Let's hire somebody who this is really important. Is that what you want? Is it important to you? Of course it is. So that's sort of the level shift. So that's another technique that we can use, and that works really well with the inexperience versus the experience. And then there's one of my all-time favorites, and this is called Has There Ever Been a Time? And this is appropriate in a market where you have a more of a seller's market, and a lot of people are trying to use the strategy of going for sale by owner. Okay, somebody might say in a listing appointment, we want to go for sale by owner, or maybe even buyers that don't want to sign a buyer agency agreement, they want to go at it on their own. So has there ever been a time? So the bottom line with this one is you want to remind the client of a time in their life when they tried to do something themselves and it turned out to be a disaster, and then equate that to this time. So you might say, well, yeah, obviously, for sale by owner, I guess, it seems like the market's moving pretty quickly and it could go fairly well for you, couldn't it? Sure. And I guess, has there ever been a time in your life where you thought you were going to save a bunch of money by doing something yourself and it turned out to be a disaster? And then most everybody has a story about that. They've tried to, they went to the Home Depot. This was my thing. I went to the Home Depot and I bought a gas grill, and they wanted like $40 to put it together. Well, I'm going to save the $40. I'm going to bring it home. I'm going to build it myself. Well, I wound up having to take it later in the week and back in the box, and lost some of the parts. I probably paid double for the grill because I had to get them to reassemble it and buy some new parts. So it was a disaster. Or there's the story about the dad who drank too much eggnog on Christmas Eve and tried to put the bike together rather than getting AGs to put it together for him. Well, that turns out to be a disaster when you have to give your kid a bike on Christmas morning in a box. That's no good. So again, we want to draw that out and draw the pain out and laugh a little bit about it, but draw the pain that they experienced before. And then so while that person's telling you that story, right at the end of that, you say, well, you know, Chris, can you see how this time is just like that time? You know, it just seems so easy from the outside in, but when you really dive in, it's a big deal, isn't it? You know, this is one of the most important financial decisions of your life. Do you agree? Don't you think it might be better to leave it to a pro than to try to go at it yourself? So again, then you want to close with that. So that's a great example of how you can use, has there ever been a time to handle the objections? So what you need to do is you need to figure out and understand that strategy that I gave you before of how to handle general objections. You need to become better at asking questions. And then you need to remember these questions, the stick and move, the level shift, and has there ever been a time? I think if you embrace those and really spend some time studying that, that can help you. Here is the, I guess, the Cliff's Notes version to this whole deal. All right, think about football or any kind of sport. If you could find the playbook that the other team had and you could study their plays, what would you do? Well, you would design defenses to stop their plays, right? Makes sense. Well, objection handling is sort of the same thing. If we knew what the buyers and the sellers, if we knew those objections, then we could prepare in advance and become much better at that. And I think everyone would agree that's going to help our careers. It's going to help us be more successful in what we do and also help us to help people get what they want. So here's the thing. We do know the objections. I've been doing this for 20 plus years. The objections really haven't changed. There could be some new ones with, I don't know, something to do with technology that maybe wasn't in it when I first got there, but they're first cousins to the objections that have been going on from eternity. So what I'm going to do is give you the 10 objections, and what you need to do is you need to come up with 3 good objection handling strategies for each one. And if you do this, this could turn you into an ultra successful agent as soon as you can develop the skills, as soon as you can get Jedi Knighted in the ability to handle these objections. So let's go through these. And if you've never heard one of these, maybe you're from another planet or something, because these are definitely happening every day. Number 1, probably the oldest one in the book. We want to think it over. I mean, that's so common. Everybody has that. Or, we want to sleep on it. We want to talk it over. Whatever it is, it's basically the same objection. Come up with a few. One of the funny ones that I used to say, because using humor can also be important in this if you have a sense of humor, which I definitely think that I have. I remember saying one time, they said, we want to sleep on it. I said, that's great. Where would you like me to sleep? They thought that was funny, and then we went on and talked a little bit more about it. So we want to think it over. Number 2, we want to talk to other agents. That's stuff that they read in like Selling Houses for Dummies. You're supposed to interview 3 agents or whatever. Well, you know what? If I'm the right agent, let's go ahead and let's get it done right now. If they do interview other agents, usually nothing good is going to happen from that. So I think if you can eliminate it to just sign the paper that night, then that's much better. Okay, so that's an objection that you're going to hear. For buyers, here's one. We want to look at more houses. We've only seen houses today. Don't we need to see this don't we need to go look at houses for 20 days? Aren't we jumping into this? We don't want to rush into something. That's sort of the bottom line of that objection. Number 4, we've never heard of you, or we've never heard of your company. When I started at Hometown Realty back in 1995, we heard that one all the time because there was only like 10 of us. But now, we've got a whole lot of people out here on the streets, and we've got a pretty good company name. But if you're new to the business, maybe they've never heard of you. You need to be ready for that. You're too new. We just talked about, hey, you're too new to the business, or how much experience you have. Ooh, that's a little scary. So you need to be ready for that. Number 6, we want to try it ourselves. We want to give it a shot for sale by owner. We talked a little bit about that one. Number 7, we want you to cut your commission. That's huge. We talked about that. We want to start high, leave a little wiggle room, come down later. Well, we all know that's not a great strategy. The house builds time on the market, and people then want to lowball, so that's not a good thing. We need to help them through that. We have a friend in the business. Talked about that one. And then another classic is the other agent said they could get us more money. So those are all objections that are out there. You may, if there's ones that you've are hearing all the time, or you're scared of, or that you got beat with, then write those down on your list and spend some time. Take 30 minutes 2 or 3 times this week and 30 minutes 2 or 3 times next week to go through these. If you want to partner up with another agent, and because again, we can all have the same answers to these. Find another agent here at Hometown, sit down and work on these together, and then role play. Agents hate to role play for some reason, but you got to practice in order to get better. Remember, the bottom line here is if you can become a better objection handler, you're going to throw yourself in the ring. You're going to throw your hat in the ring to take more listings and to find more buyers. If you're not interested in making any money in the real estate business, if you're not interested in helping people, then don't worry about this. You don't need this. But if you want to be successful and you want to be the best you can be, this is a great place to start. So you've got the strategy, you've got the objections, we know the other team's plays, so now all you need to do is get to work, get after it, and become the Jedi Knight of objection handling.